Well, hello and welcome everyone to the Leader's Inner Journey, where we talk about how personal growth fuels business success. And with me today, I have Doug Gfeller. I have known Doug for, gosh, more than a decade, Doug, right?
It is.
Probably almost 12 or 13 years. And Doug and I want to share a personal story before I introduce him. Doug and I worked together on the board of the Orange County chapter of ICF. And one of the things that I admire about Doug in a leadership position is that he has this amazing presence. It's a grounding presence. And he would always ask me how he contributed to the leadership team when I was on the leadership team with him. And sometimes it was hard for me to express this. And this is some of what we're going to be talking in this series about, is some of what a leader does that's very powerful and often the most effective, happens to be somewhat invisible and hard to articulate. And with Doug, it was his presence, just having him. So, for example, if you have a board and Doug is your coach and he's sitting at your board meeting, just having him there can make you feel empowered because he grounds you. At least that's what he did for me. And so that's one thing I so admire about you, Doug. And I'm so grateful to have you with us today. I'm going to
Thank you very
start.
much. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm going to start by reading Doug's formal bio, so you know a little bit about who he is. Doug is a master certified coach, accomplished senior executive, consultant, thought leader, and board member with more than 45 years of success across the construction, manufacturing, and real estate industries. His broad areas of expertise include entrepreneurship, executive coaching, organizational leadership, business planning, business process improvement, and financial strategy. Doug has been a frequent speaker to groups on coaching topics and is a motivational speaker for business groups. He's taught courses at UCI Irvine for 7 years, hosted a weekly podcast featuring coaches and senior executives, and he interviewed me on the podcast a couple of times, which I really enjoyed. And Doug is on several boards of directors currently. Storm Industries, LNX Construction, I think I said that right, LNS Construction.
LNS.
And D'Angelo Company? Is that how you
D'Angelo,
pronounce it?
correct.
D'Angelo Company. So, Doug, I'm so happy to have you with us today. I know I shared a little bit about my experience with you. We have a formal bio, but maybe let's just start with something light to help our listeners and our watchers get to know you a little bit better. Maybe give us an example. You know, you've been a leader yourself and you've coached leaders. What's maybe an embarrassing or a funny moment that you can share with us about your experience as a leader?
You know, you told me you were going to ask that question. There are so many embarrassing stories I could tell, but I don't want to. But one story that sort of stuck with me was back in my days of being a home builder. I was developing a project in the city of Buena Park, and we were in front of the city council for approval and having a very hard time because one of the units was only going to be 850 square feet large. And they didn't like that. And they said, you know, nobody can live in something that small. And there was a lot of discussion. And I realized that really nobody knew what 850 square feet was. It's a number, but nobody had really experienced it. And so I asked if anybody would be willing to go on a tour with me to observe and see what it was like. And I was fortunate enough that the mayor said, I'll do that. Let's postpone the decision and give me a list of projects and I'll pick one and we'll go look at them. So we did. So he picked a project. I didn't know which one he would pick. It was in the city of Santa Ana. It was a condo conversion. And we're walking through the unit. He's going, this is kind of small. And while we were walking through it, these units were for sale. There was a young lady there who was also looking at it to buy. And he stopped her and he said, do you mind if I ask you a few questions? Would you live in a unit like this? And she said, oh, yeah. She said, we've been looking for something like this for a long time. It's just the right size for us. And he said, really? He said, what would you buy this one? She says, well, we don't really like this neighborhood. We're from Buena Park. but we don't have anything in Buena Park like this. Now, this is the mayor of Buena Park she's
Oh
talking
my
to,
gosh, that's so
and didn't know it,
coincidental.
and didn't know it. He looks at me and he says, "You set this up." I said, "No, I didn't. I had no way of knowing which project you'd pick." Anyhow, we got the project approved. It was a very funny, kind of embarrassing story for him that, you know, uh, here was one of his own constituents looking in another city, and they're ready to turn down the opportunity to provide for him. So,
Wow, wow. That's such a great story. It's funny how fate sort of intervenes sometimes, isn't it?
well, and from a leadership point of view, the thing that really, when I thought back on that story, that hit me was, luckily it was a day where I was observant enough to realize that it wasn't the numbers that were scaring people. It was emotional. They didn't
Hmm.
know what 850 square feet meant. And so once I realized that, then instead of arguing the merits of square footage, it was, let's go look at it, let's see it. And I just lucked out with the young lady who was looking at the unit. I couldn't have planned it better.
Right. I think it's so important what you say about the emotional versus the facts, because
Yeah.
I've been reading a lot lately about that, and how important it is to pair that emotional and really understand that. So I'd like to maybe start with, what leaders have inspired you most? Do you have some examples, and maybe tell us what it was about those leaders that kind of sets them apart?
That's an easy question. He's no longer with us, but my idol and all-time favorite leader was Ray Watson of the Irvine Company. Ray was
Wow.
president of the Irvine Company while I worked there. Uh, and he was a wonderful human being and a great leader. And the things that made him a great leader were his vision, his creativity, and the fact that he was humble. This was a man who had a vision for taking a piece of farmland and converting it to a world-class city, the city of Irvine. Okay. And his vision was not just for design, what would be built on the ground, but it was a vision for the way in which people would live, where bike paths were more important than streets, where the front of units were important, how they looked and what they communicated to the community. Uh, his creativity extended way beyond just land design, but to how to manage. Here we were, a farming company that had recently moved from the farmhouse out in Irvine to Newport Center, and creating an organizational structure that would let us compete with world-class developers.
Wow.
And yet he was a humble man. We didn't always like that. He liked to drive Hondas. We wish the company provided Mercedes as company cars, but he was a humble person. He was approachable. Anybody could talk to him anytime. Most days you would find him having his lunch at the hot dog stand in Fashion Island, sitting by himself, ready to talk to whoever walked up and wanted to talk to him. So great
You know,
individual.
what do you think that humility and approachability did for the company and for the people that worked for him? How do you think it may have changed them or
It,
changed how
it,
things
it
work?
created it created an environment, Nahid, where you weren't afraid to fail.
Mm.
It created an environment where you were willing to experiment, where you were willing to be outspoken, because he encouraged that. You weren't going to get slapped down. You weren't going to get somebody dealing with you with a superior attitude. It was an inquisitive, curiosity sort of driven culture.
Do you think that kind of humility can be taught? So I know that you have also been a leadership coach, and you've worked with a lot of leaders, probably some more humble than others, and you've probably witnessed the effect it had on their organizations, around their cultures.
I don't know the answer to that. I think definitely it can be fine tuned.
Hmm.
Okay. I think that sometimes we forget to be humble. Sometimes we don't realize the wake we're leaving behind us. And so all of those things can be coached and improved. But if you're frankly just an egotistical, it's all for me kind of human being, I don't know that coaching's going to change it. But I've met very few people like that.
Yeah, I would imagine that most people that invite coaching into their lives are looking for some degree of self-improvement. But now that this humility reminds me of that's one of the things about you that creates that grounding presence that I talked about in the beginning. Um, you know, that humility, that approachability, it creates a psychologically safe environment, and people thrive because they're not afraid to fail. So that's really inspiring. I think that's really important too in terms of factor.
And the
So
key thing for
yeah.
leadership coaching is that most people that I've coached, leaders, they're already good leaders,
Hmm.
but they're interested in being better leaders. And so it's the kind of thing that a little bit of improvement can have a huge impact because you're already working with a base that's relatively stable and sound.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Now, you were a leader too,
Yeah.
right? For many years before you moved into leadership coaching. Did you have a coach when you were a leader, or did you experience any times or any great growth moments that you could
My
share with us?
my first coach wasn't until I signed up for training to learn how to coach and was required to
Mhm.
hire a coach. But I was fortunate enough while I had my home building company for almost 20 years to get involved in CEO peer groups.
Okay.
And that really provided me sort of a group coaching environment
Hmm.
where I met once a month with peer CEOs who were in non-competitive businesses and was able to share my questions, my insecurities, my lack of knowledge within that group and feel safe and protected and to get really good advice and to get new and different perspectives.
And is that how you feel that group changed you? Is that extra perspective, or were there some other changes you made as a result of being in that group?
I think it's all about perspective. You know,
Hmm.
the name of my business is the coaching perspective because I'm so committed that we don't learn a lot that's new, or we don't get a lot. We can't go read a book or watch a YouTube video or on, but it's only through conversation. It's only through coaching that only through peer groups that you can truly start to understand new and different perspectives, that you can let go of the way you've always looked at things, let go of your tried, proven, knee-jerk reaction that served you well in the purpose in the past, but isn't helping you anymore. So
Hmm.
perspective is a big word for me.
Right. I can only imagine because, I think about some of the people that I coach, and I would say that's one of the most difficult things for them to get out of their own way of looking at things. And some people are much better at it than others, but the ones that actually can quickly get themselves into the shoes of someone who is on their team, for example, or a peer that seems to be getting under their skin, or even a client company, they tend to do much better.
Yeah. What I found out very quickly in peer groups where the peers were all in different industries
Mhm.
was we all have basically the same problems as leaders in running a business.
Mhm.
But given the industry we're in, we have learned and sort of developed standard ways, standard perspectives of how to look at the problem and how to solve it. And it's only when you talk to people in other industries that you can break out of that and go, oh, I never thought of it that way. And to
Mhm.
me, that's what coaching's all about. It isn't just asking questions. It's asking questions to create a new perspective, to open up the door, to look at things differently.
Yeah, yeah, that's powerful. So, how do you believe in general that personal growth contributes to effectiveness? Is there anything that you would add on to this? I know you say learning new perspectives, kind of learning the ability to learn extra perspective, you know, what else?
I think we've already, we've kind of gotten into that. I think it's all about getting in an environment that you feel safe in,
Mhm.
where you can experiment with trying on new perspectives. It's sort of like, I mean, for most men, buying clothes is not something we like to do.
Right.
And if I go with my wife to buy some new clothes, it's like I can't look at what's folded up on the table or what's hanging on the rack and know whether that's going to look good on me. I've got to try it on
Hmm.
and see whether that feels good, whether that looks good, whether it's comfortable for me. And it's a trial and error process. And leadership is the same way. It's about trying. How willing are you to try on new perspectives, to try looking at it from a different way? I mean, I think a lot of what we're hearing in today's environment is all about perspective. We can call it race, we can call it economic change, we can call it political distancing. I don't know. But it's all about trying on a different perspective. How does the other person live? How do
Hmm.
they look at it? So I think that's really how you develop as a leader, is your ability to quickly and easily change your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I can only imagine in the current political environment if people were open to, you know, really trying to put themselves in the shoes of the other side and look at that perspective, that those discussions would be way more productive. And maybe they are behind closed doors. Maybe the activists out in the street are intentionally providing an extreme perspective, but maybe, and I'm hoping that behind closed doors we have people that are really trying to see problems from all angles, because that's important.
It's not easy to do. You know,
Hmm.
my father-in-law is a ex sheriff, worked for the district attorney's office, retired now. But if you want to talk about law enforcement to him, you're going to get a different perspective than if you talked about it to my brother, who was more of a hippie, free
Hmm.
spirit in his days, and didn't have quite the same attitude about law enforcement that maybe my father-in-law has. So
Hmm.
until you've sat down and sort of explored those perspectives and tried them on, they just sound wrong until you've been there.
Yeah, and the only way to get there is to sort of jump into somebody else's story, because we obviously can only have the perspectives that that are based on our experiences that we've had. We can only have a limited number of experiences in
Yeah.
life. But when you're open to other perspectives, you can really begin to multiply the experiences you have.
You know, it's as simple as if you were to use a sports analogy, many football teams will have the players run the competing offense, the team they're going to play against this Saturday.
Hmm.
The team will run that team's plays to get a sense of how it feels to be in the way they run those positions, the way they handle the ball, the way they move. And you can watch it on a film, that's one thing. But if you have to go out there on a field and do it yourself, now all of a sudden you've got a different perspective. And from a football point of view, now you have a perspective that allow you to react to it much better.
That's true. And one thing that you mentioned that I think is really important, because I tend to try to do everything in my head. But the example you just gave, you can't really watch it on film and get the same depth of experience as if you actually get in there and run the plays and feel with your whole body what it's like. And I know, I'm just thinking of a leader that I had coached and how badly his team wanted him to sort of sit in their shoes and have him come, not necessarily do their job, but understand what it's like to do their job,
Yeah.
and not just understand mentally, but maybe sit with them for a day. So yeah, I think that that's really important. So one thing I'd really like to do to give something very tangible to our audience, especially those who are aspiring leaders and really want to be a better leader, or maybe they're not a leader yet and they'd like to be seen as a leader. What are one or two top tips you can share with our audience that you believe maybe help a leader work very effectively, or a skill that maybe someone could work on building that would help them be seen as a leader?
Well, let me start with a couple of very basic things. One, the basic tool that has served me well for all my years in business is, early on, I went to a class and was encouraged to keep a daily journal. And I, all of these years, have kept that daily journal. There's the last 2 years on the shelf behind me. There's the 20 years in a box in the garage. But but that daily journal allows me, at first I thought it was just a way, was this to supplement my bad memory? Uh, was this to provide evidence for a court case? And it does all of those things. But what it really does is when I sit down and write in it, or when I sit down and review this week's entries at the end of the week, it gives me a chance to reflect on a different level what went on in that conversation, what went on in that meeting. Because when I'm here talking to you now, I'm focused on reacting right now.
Mm-hmm.
When I watch this later, I'll look at it with a different perspective. I'm now an observer, not a participant.
Mm-hmm.
So daily journaling, I think, is really, really key for anybody, and especially for executives, because as leaders, we've delegated so much to other people in the organization. This is a case where you need to take your own journal and write in it yourself, not have somebody else do it. The other thing is we never are through learning how to communicate better. We need to constantly brush up on our communication skills, not because they deteriorate, but because the audience is constantly changing and we need to modify how we communicate. It can be as simple as the fact that a few years ago I was given a presentation and I talked about time management. I said, you want to look in your Rolodex. And I realized the audience was looking at me as if, what's a Rolodex? For those of you who don't know, before electronic calendars, it was a little thing with cards that you wrote down people's names and addresses and phone numbers. But that's a simple communication example. You have to learn new words. You have to learn new meanings. You have to learn new ways in which people are comfortable talking. Right now, we're all struggling. How do we communicate over Zoom?
Mm-hmm.
We can convey facts easily, but how do I convey to you the emotion that I feel about this topic? How do I convey the intensity of it when I'm sitting here as stiff, unmoving, nervous as can be, rather than, the way I usually am about waving my arms and talking with my hands and the good Italian in me that knows how to communicate kind of thing. The other thing is good leaders have the ability to communicate vision. And I don't mean just the facts of where we're going. I mean the emotion behind the vision. If you can't communicate an emotional vision, you're not communicating a vision.
That's true. That's true.
If it doesn't have emotion tied on it, now it's just a cute little saying on a business card. But if there's emotion behind it, we built a project in Irvine called Woodbridge, and we were trying to open it up, and we had 7 models opening at the same time, 7 different builders. It was a mess, all kinds of problems. And the week before, my marketing guy came up with an idea, and he went out and he had buttons printed up like a campaign button that you pin to your shirt, and it said, "I built it." And had the logo. And he handed them out. We handed them out to every single person in the field, hundreds of people, from decorators to ditch diggers to traffic cops to whoever. Those people showed up the next day with different clothes on, but the same button. They took it off yesterday's shirt and put it onto. It created an emotion. I built it. Okay? Not we built it. I built it. So emotional visions are key. The other thing is the ability to set priorities. Not just your own, but everybody else's.
Yeah.
I had a situation, I was coaching a company, and they asked me to facilitate a planning meeting because they were having such a difficult time. And so I went into this room, and we had all the senior executives, the president of the company. 3 walls were whiteboards, and I said, let's start by putting everything that we need to do on this whiteboard. We filled the whiteboards in the room, just filled it. All kinds of great ideas, great goals, great plans. I turned to the CEO and I said, so George, what's the number one priority? Take a look at this list and tell me the number one thing here. He looked at the list, he thought about it for a bit, and he came back and he said, everything's number one. We had identified the problem.
Yep. I had a boss that did that to me once.
The inability of him, and I don't mean to pick on him, it was just but the inability to make a decision, to decide what was number one when everything was worth doing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It froze the organization. It clouded what we were working on day to day. So setting priorities is key. Those are what I would consider some really sort of basic essentials that every CEO should have in their toolbox: their daily journal, their communication skills, their emotional vision, and the ability to set priorities.
I love that. So for those of you who are listening or for those of you who are watching, write those down and I'll have Doug repeat them to you one more time, because these are things you can work on no matter where you are in the organization. You can work on them if you are not in a leadership position yet and you're hoping that at some point you will be. So you want to be equipped now to kind of hit the ground running. Or if you're already in a leadership position, how can you take your game to the next level? Doug, would you be willing to repeat those 4 tips?
Sure. The 4 things were: create a daily journal and make sure at least once a week to go back and review it and reflect on it. Constantly monitor your own communication style and develop new styles to work with the changing environments that you work with. One size does not fit all. Okay. The boardroom's different from the playground. And have an emotional vision. Be able to communicate and paint a vivid word picture, emotional vision of what you want people to accomplish. And last, be able to set priorities and communicate those. If you can't set the priorities, nobody else in the organization can.
Yeah, such great advice. Thank you so much, Doug. And for those of you who are in a leadership position and looking for a coach, or a board member perhaps to bring new perspectives to you and your company's challenges, you can contact Doug at www.thecoachingperspective.com. And I hopefully have his contact information on the screen here as you're watching this. And then to watch or listen to more of our interviews, go to coachnahid.com. Thanks again for coming, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Nahi. It's been a pleasure.